June 23, 2008, Dallas, Texas. A sense of foreboding hung in the humid summer air as flashing red and blue lights illuminated the upscale Highland Park neighborhood. Police cruisers and an ambulance screeched to a halt before the imposing white-columned mansion. Inside, paramedics and uniformed officers rushed through the foyer, their footsteps echoing beneath a glittering crystal chandelier. At the center of the commotion lay Ryan Carter, a 23-year-old whose life was ebbing away with every labored breath. On the phone, Grace Hollingsworth, an heiress known throughout Dallas for her philanthropic galas, desperately pleaded for help. Her designer dress was torn at the shoulder, and dark streaks of mascara ran down her pale cheeks. When the paramedics realized the severity of Ryan's injuries, a deep stab wound across his torso, they worked frantically to stabilize him. Detective Hannah Nolan arrived moments later, surveying the eerie tableau. A single high-heeled shoe lay abandoned in the corridor, while shards of broken glass glittered around a toppled decanter near an ornate fireplace. Grace stood trembling in the corner, her eyes filled with panic as the detective approached. The heiress's voice trembled when she tried to speak. I didn't mean, I don't know what happened." Her words trailed off into tearful gasps. Detective Nolan signaled one of the uniformed officers to escort Grace to a quieter area, away from prying eyes and the stretcher bearing Ryan's motionless body. Outside, neighbors gathered in robes and pajamas, their worried whispers growing louder with speculation. For years, the Hollingsworth estate had been the envy of Dallas's elite, a paragon of old money opulence. The family fortune, built on generations of successful oil and real estate ventures, had afforded Grace a life of privilege. No one could have imagined that a grisly crime might unfold in this picture-perfect setting. Yet, as Ryan was rushed to the ambulance, Detective Nolan sensed layers of deceit swirling beneath the outward glamour. The heiress seemed reluctant to speak, her voice wavering as though she struggled to comprehend the dire situation. Meanwhile, pieces of the puzzle, bloodstains, broken furniture, signs of a violent scuffle, hinted that something far more twisted than a simple accident had occurred. Grace's phone rang incessantly, echoing through the cavernous hallway. Each shrill ring signaled the frantic attempts by family members and friends to reach her. But the grim reality was undeniable. Someone had left Ryan Carter on the brink of death, and the evidence pointed squarely to Grace as a central figure. Detective Nolan carefully led Grace to a small sitting room, instructing her to sit down before asking the first round of questions. "What happened tonight, Miss Hollingsworth? Start from the beginning." Grace's only response was a trembling lip and wide, fearful eyes. The crime scene unit sealed off the mansion, photographing every smear of blood and every shattered crystal fragment. As midnight slipped into the early hours, one truth glimmered through the chaos. The Hollingsworth name would never be the same after this night. Were they dealing with a violent lover's quarrel, or was something far darker at play? While medics fought to save Ryan Carter's life, a young heiress stood at the center of a gathering storm, one that threatened to expose hidden lies, roiling passions, and the most primal of motives. In the days following the stabbing, whispers circulated around Dallas high society, echoing in country clubs, charity luncheons, and exclusive penthouse soirees. At the heart of the gossip was Grace Hollingsworth, an heiress who had long been the darling of local tabloids for her impeccable style and philanthropic flair. Beneath the layers of gossip, a more complex story was taking shape. The Hollingsworth family had been powerful for generations, beginning with Winston Hollingsworth's grandfather, who struck oil on barren West Texas fields in the 1920s. Over time, the family expanded into real estate and other lucrative ventures, amassing a fortune that granted them near untouchable status. Growing up in this legacy, Grace learned early on that with power came expectation, especially the expectation to keep scandal at bay. Behind the Corinthian pillars of the family's Highland Park mansion, however, tensions often ran high. As the only child, Grace lived under the gaze of her parents, Winston and Evelyn Hollingsworth. Her father was a stern, imposing figure, while her mother was known for her steely poise under any social pressure. For years, Grace followed a rigid script: attend the best boarding schools, date suitable heirs, and shine at every society function. But an air of loneliness crept into her life, something money and prestige could never quite erase. That loneliness led her to cross paths with Ryan Carter at an exclusive fitness club in uptown Dallas. Ryan was a personal trainer, fresh out of junior college, hustling to pay his bills. He caught Grace's eye with his genuine charm and an easy smile that defied the typical sycophantic attention she received. He treated her like a person, not a prize. And for a while, that was enough to ignite a spark. Yet beneath Ryan's friendly veneer lay a streak of ambition. Born in a working-class neighborhood, he had big dreams of making it in a city defined by wealth. Though he was far from naive, something about Grace's station enthralled him. Being with an heiress wasn't merely about money. It was about belonging to a world where people drove luxury cars without blinking, and million-dollar donations were scribbled on checks as casually as supermarket receipts. As their relationship deepened, Ryan showed Grace a side of herself she had never truly acknowledged. For her part, Grace found in Ryan a refreshing escape from a world that demanded perfection. Little did she know this newfound sense of liberation would come at an unbearable cost. Quiet conversations with the Hollingsworth household staff revealed that arguments had been escalating between Grace and her parents over Ryan. Winston even threatened to disinherit his daughter if she continued seeing him. Rather than heed her father's warning, Grace dug in her heels. She began siphoning money from private accounts, funneling it into half-baked investment schemes Ryan pitched to her. Though her parents suspected she was being used, Grace refused to hear it. As scandalous rumors multiplied, so did the tension within the estate. The staff whispered of hushed phone calls, nights where Grace wouldn't return until dawn, and the click of multiple locks being turned whenever Ryan visited. No one suspected just how destructive their bond would become, but by the time the sirens blared on June 23, the fuse had already burned dangerously short. Behind the mansion's glittering facade, secrets simmered. Secrets that would bring an entire legacy crashing down in a single, bloody. The tabloids had a field day with the budding romance between the Dallas heiress and her younger lover. Society pages reveled in every new paparazzi photo, fueling a scandal that Grace Hollingsworth found both thrilling and terrifying. If her parents' disapproval hadn't been enough to ward off Ryan Carter, public speculation about their relationship only seemed to fan the flames of their desire. With each passing week, Grace and Ryan's connection intensified. They began meeting in clandestine locations: an upscale cocktail lounge at midnight, a secluded courtyard of a private resort, even the back seat of a chauffeured limousine after a gala event. Wherever they went, sparks flew and boundaries blurred. But as the passion grew, so did the shadows around them. Ryan's demands for money became more frequent, and Grace found herself making excuses to her bank managers to facilitate withdrawals from trust funds. He promised he'd pay her back when his investments matured, but friends of Ryan suspected he was in over his head. Arguments followed, periods of euphoria like a storm chasing a calm. If Ryan saw Grace chatting too warmly with a wealthy acquaintance, he'd bristle with jealousy. In turn, she grew resentful of his constant suspicions, even as she tried to placate him. They were locked in a cycle of high-stakes romance and simmering anger. Meanwhile, Winston Hollingsworth ramped up his attempts to break them apart. Rumors circulated that he hired private investigators to follow Ryan, capturing incriminating photos of him with other women. These tactics only drove Grace further into Ryan's arms, widening the rift between father and daughter. At society events, once open to her every gesture, Grace sensed eyes tracking her every move. The same patrons who had applauded her charity work now whispered behind her back. She caught snatches of conversations about gold diggers and family scandals as she drifted past in her designer gowns. Anger flared within her, fueling a sense of rebellion that made Ryan's presence even more addictive. Behind the scenes, The staff at the Hollingsworth mansion feared a confrontation was on the horizon. Maids overheard shrill arguments through closed doors. A gardener noticed Ryan's car parked overnight more frequently, a silent token of his growing hold over Grace. Tensions brewed like a thunderhead, inevitable yet unstoppable. Yep. What no one anticipated was the level of desperation Ryan might display. His friends noticed him becoming increasingly paranoid. He once boasted about how Grace could never leave him. "She's in too deep," he said, alluding to shared secrets that would destroy her image if revealed. Conversely, Grace confided to a close friend that she feared Ryan was slipping into darker patterns, yet she felt powerless to stop. Their fights grew more explosive, but the makeup sessions afterwards kept them bound together in a toxic web of dependency. The initial thrill of forbidden love had transformed into something potent, destructive, and all-consuming. By June 23, the pressure had reached its boiling point. Had Grace recognized the danger earlier, she might have saved both of them. Instead, the final turn in their doomed love story was set, leading straight to the horrific night that would end one life and irrevocably change another. The seeds of tragedy had been sown long before, and now, in the stifling heat of a Dallas summer, they were about to bear deadly fruit. Night of June 23, 2008. The sun had long dipped behind the Dallas skyline, leaving a hush across the Hollingsworth estate. Grace paced the opulent living room, nerves raw from yet another argument with her parents over Ryan. She anxiously glanced at her phone, awaiting a text or call. Nothing. The silence weighed heavily. Around 10 o'clock, the ornate front doors opened, and Ryan entered, his expression grim. In low, urgent tones, he demanded they speak in private. The pair retreated to the study, a stately room filled with dark mahogany shelves and leather-bound volumes. Within moments, voices escalated to shouts. Grace accused Ryan of using her for money. Ryan countered with threats of exposing her financial improprieties. Their words ricocheted off the paneled walls, each accusation flaring into a new wave of fury. Suddenly, the argument turned physical. A vase shattered against the floor. Papers were hurled from the desk in a flurry of desperation. It was then that a knife appeared, a small but lethal object that changed the course of their lives. Whether Grace grabbed it in self-defense or Ryan wielded it first remains a tangled claim of he said, she said. When the haze cleared, Grace stood over Ryan, her hands stained with blood, a guttural scream tearing from her throat. She fumbled for her phone, the polished marble floor slippery beneath her shoes. The 911 operator's calm inquiries contrasted starkly with Grace's hysterical breathing. Moments later, the door burst open as the household staff, awoken by the commotion, rushed. They recoiled at the sight. Ryan sprawled across the floor, an ominous crimson pool expanding beneath him, and Grace shaking uncontrollably. Paramedics and police arrived in tandem. Detective Hannah Nolan, cool under pressure, took in the scene. She saw the toppled desk lamp, the shattered glass, the evidence of a savage confrontation. Focusing on the bloodied knife, she carefully instructed the forensics team to bag it. Ryan was still alive, though barely conscious. Medics loaded him onto a stretcher, an oxygen mask covering his face as they fought to stabilize him. Grace was ushered into the foyer, tears streaming down her cheeks, her voice choked with sobs. She babbled about blackmail, betrayal, and how it all went too far. But her explanations were disjointed, offering no clear picture of who had truly instigated the violence. It was only after the paramedics left that Detective Nolan noticed a duffel bag hidden beneath the desk. Inside, she discovered torn photographs, unsigned documents involving significant wire transfers, and scrawled notes that hinted at extortion. As the crime scene tape went up around the mansion, the media caught wind of the incident. Their cameras flashed from beyond the gates, capturing the sight of a distraught heiress in handcuffs. Soon, the entire city would be buzzing with speculations, and the Hollingsworth name would become synonymous with scandal and murder. But in that moment, Detective Nolan's focus rested squarely on the fragile young woman whose life had just shattered and the question of whether she was a tragic victim of manipulation or a calculating killer. The hospital room where Ryan Carter clung to life became the focal point of a swirling media storm. Outside, reporters jostled for any scraps of information on the heiress turned suspect. Inside, detectives waited anxiously to see if Ryan would be stable enough to testify against Grace Hollingsworth. Grace, meanwhile, found herself under house arrest, a privilege of her social standing, awaiting formal charges. The Hollingsworth family's high press lawyer, Gerald Westbrook, rushed to her defense. He arranged press conferences, painting Grace as a victim of Ryan's blackmail. Many in Dallas society were torn. Some believed Grace was a naive woman caught in a predator's web. Others cast her as a calculating heiress determined to protect her fortune. Detective Hannah Nolan methodically pieced together the evidence. Financial records revealed multiple wire transfers from Grace's accounts to offshore entities linked to Ryan. Testimonies from Ryan's acquaintances suggested he had, indeed, boasted of controlling Grace through secret leverage. However, the damning reality remained. The knife that wounded Ryan had Grace's fingerprints all over it. When Ryan finally awoke, his statement, slurred by medication and pain, painted a picture of Grace lashing out in a jealous rage. He claimed to have threatened to leave her, triggering a frenzied attack. The prosecution seized on this version of events, while the defense insisted it was an act of desperation by a woman cornered by a manipulative lover. During the trial, the public devoured each salacious detail. Courtroom sketches and tabloids alike depicted Grace and Ryan as tragic figures bound by greed, lust, and betrayal. The press scoured every nuance of their affair: hotel receipts, text messages, and lavish gifts that stained Grace's squeaky clean image. It seemed like forensics experts showed the jury the reconstructed timeline, security camera footage placing Ryan at the mansion that night, the blood spatter analysis matching a close-quarter struggle, and the frantic 911 call capturing Grace's frantic confession. Despite her sobbing insistence that she had no choice, the undeniable fact remained that she had inflicted the life-threatening wound. Midway through the trial, Winston Hollingsworth took the stand in a desperate attempt to salvage his daughter's reputation. He acknowledged the family's disapproval of Ryan, admitting they had tried to separate the lovers, but he insisted that never would they condone violence. The defense tried to frame Winston's testimony as proof of Ryan's unscrupulous motives. He latched onto the heiress for money, Winston declared. Grace was a pawn in his game. Nevertheless, the jury struggled to reconcile Grace's portrayal as a victim with the brutality of the stabbing. In the end, they returned a verdict of guilty of voluntary manslaughter. The judge sentenced Grace to 12 years, eligible for parole after serving a portion of her term. Shockwaves rippled through Dallas's elite circles. The darling of society had fallen from Grace in the most public way imaginable. For Ryan, the outcome was equally devastating. Though he narrowly survived, the physical and emotional scars would remain. His name, forever tied to scandal, became synonymous with the manipulative opportunist. The prosecution declined to pursue blackmail charges, citing the complexity of the case and Ryan's fragile health. Months later, as Grace sat in a prison cell, she reflected on the night that shattered her world. In the public eye, she was a cautionary tale, a reminder that wealth and privilege could not inoculate one from moral dissent. The Hollingsworth mansion stood silent behind its gates, its stately columns a testament to the fleeting nature of power when undone by hidden desires. In the end, both Grace and Ryan paid dearly for their dangerous liaison. Alice moved on to the next headline, but the ghost of their ill-fated romance lingered, a stark warning that even in the world of luxury and prestige, some obsessions are deadly.